If you stop for a second right now and just look at the world around you, you're using what is, well, arguably the most complex sensory structure in the human body, the eye.
It really is.
Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into the blueprint and the actual construction process of that amazing organ.
And it is a masterclass in complexity. We're trying to navigate the instructions from these, very dense anatomy texts to build a picture of vision from scratch, right in your mind.
But with no diagram.
No diagrams at all, just spoken description.
Exactly. Our mission is to mentally walk you through the incredible folding, the pushing, and the pulling of embryonic tissues that turn a simple bulge on the developing brain into a fully functioning sensory system.
We're talking about precision choreography on a cellular level.
It sounds incredible.
And that precise choreography, it all hinges on what embryologists call inductive interactions. The eye isn't built by just one tissue type. It's a perfectly staged dance between three primary embryonic tissues.
Right.
First, you've got the neurectoderm, which comes right from the brain, and that forms the sensory retina.
Right, the seeing part.
The seeing part.
Oh.
Second, the surface ectoderm, which gives us the lens and the corneal epithelium. And finally, you have this migrating construction crew, the neural crest mesenchyme, which forms the fibrous coats and all the critical support structures.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start at the very beginning. If the eye is built from the brain, how does the embryo even decide where those structures are going to start?
It all begins in a region of the anterior neurectoderm called the eye field. This area gets specified very early on through the activation of these powerful molecular architects.
Genes, you mean?
Genes, yes. Genes like PAX6, RAX, SIX3, and OTX2, which essentially just flag this tissue and say, you have the potential to become the eye.
So these genes are setting the coordinates. But what's fascinating is that initially this is just one single broad domain, right? Not two separate ones.
Here's where it gets really interesting and incredibly precise. It's the midline expression of a gene for a protein called sonic hedgehog, or SH.
SHH.
Yeah, and SHH acts like a molecular divider. It is absolutely necessary to subdivide that single eye field into two distinct bilateral domains, the future sites of your two eyes.
So if that signal goes wrong,
Yeah.
what happens?
That is a critical clinical correlation. If you lose SHH function, that midline division just fails. You get incomplete separation of the prosencephalon.
And that leads
to devastating anomalies. Things like holoprosencephaly, or in the most extreme cases, the failure of bilateral development entirely, which results in cyclopia.
a single eye.
The formation of a single central eye. The precision required just to get two eyes. It's humbling.
Let's ground this in a timeline. The very first morphological sign, the optic primordium, it appears around stage 10, so that's only about 28 or 29 days in.
Tiny.
And if you could zoom in on the inner surface of the developing brain folds, you'd see this slight indentation appearing. That first dip is called the optic sulcus.
Then by stage 13, just a few days later, the walls of that brain area actively push outward. They project laterally toward the surface layer.
Like little balloons inflating.
Exactly like tiny balloons inflating outward. These protrusions are the optic vesicles.
And this isn't just a physical move, is it? It's a communication event.
Yes. The moment that optic vesicle makes contact with the surface ectoderm, it forces a change in those surface cells.
It tells them what to do.
It induces them to thicken and form what's called the lens placode.
So that contact is everything.
It is the pivotal inductive influence. And if, for some genetic reason, the optic vesicle fails to form or push out, that entire developmental cascade just halts.
Leading to?
Anophthalmia, the absence of the eye.
Okay, now we move into the coordinated folding at stage 14. This is where the shape really starts to change. I mean, I can barely visualize that amount of coordination. How do the brain part and the surface tissue fold at the same time?
They're synchronized. Tiny cellular extensions, filopodia, they actually tether the two tissues together so they can coordinate the next move. Invagination, folding inward.
So let's start with the lens. That thickened surface part, the placode, it folds inward, forms a pit, and then it pinches off entirely from the surface.
Right, and it becomes the hollow lens vesicle, and that surface ectoderm immediately closes over where the pit used to be, reforming a continuous layer.
And that new layer is the future corneal epithelium.
Precisely.
And at the exact same time, the optic vesicle, that balloon from the brain, it collapses inward on itself, kind of like pushing your thumb into a soft rubber ball.
That's a perfect analogy. And that creates the deep two-layered structure we call the optic cup.
And this cup structure, This defines the future retina.
Yes, exactly. The inner layer, which is now facing that new lens, will become the thick sensory neural retina. The outer thin layer becomes the retinal pigmented epithelium, or RPE.
And what's crucial is that relationship between them, isn't it? The space between them.
It is. The apical surfaces of these two layers now face each other across this tiny potential space, and if you connect that to pathology,
That's the weak spot. That's where retinal detachment happens in the adult eye.
that is the exact site of weakness. But the cup isn't a perfect sphere yet. It's initially incomplete on the bottom. It's open in a wide groove.
The optic fissure.
The optic, or choroid fissure. And this groove runs all the way down the optic stalk that connects the cup back to the brain.
Why is that gap necessary? What's it for?
It's the critical entryway. Mesenchyme and, crucially, vasculature need a way in.
Okay.
So specialized tissue migrates inward through this groove, bringing with it the differentiating hyaloid artery, which temporarily supplies the developing lens and inner retina.
And the success of the entire globe then depends on the next step that fissure has to close.
It must close. It happens via apoptosis-programmed cell death at its margins.
And if it doesn't?
Failure to close causes a common congenital anomaly called coloboma. This results in a deficiency in the choroid or retina or the iris. It often gives the pupil a kind of abnormal keyhole-like shape.
And that's often associated with smaller eyes in general, right?
Very often associated with microphthalmia, yes.
Okay, so once that structure is sealed, the inner cup layer, the neural retina gets to work. How does it manage to create all those complex layers we know in the adult eye?
It's a remarkable process. All 7 retinal cell types, ganglion cells, photoreceptors, all of them, they all derive from a common progenitor cell.
Okay.
And they're born in a conserved, regulated sequence. The ganglion cells and cone cells, for sharp vision, are born early. The rods and support cells, they develop much later.
So the recognizable layers we see are established through migration. Visualize the new cells separating. The ganglion cells move furthest inward, forming the inner plexiform layer.
Right, and they're followed by the separation of the inner nuclear layer from the outer nuclear layer, which are separated by another layer, the outer plexiform layer. It's just a beautifully choreographed system of layering.
And while all that is happening, the optic stalk, that connection to the brain, is being converted into the optic nerve.
Yes, the axons from those early-born retinal ganglion cells, they pass directly into the stalk's wall. And those axons actually promote the stalk's own tissue to differentiate into astrocytes, support cells.
And it's important to note the timing here, right? The optic nerve is functional, but the myelination, the insulation, that starts very late.
Very late, just before birth, and it continues well into postnatal life.
The vascular supply also shifts.
It does. Retinal vessels form via a dual process, vasculogenesis and angiogenesis. But crucially, the foveal area, the area for your sharpest vision, remains permanently avascular.
And speaking of connections, the two optic nerves meet and partially cross or decussate at the optic chiasma, connecting the visual fields to the brain.
Right. Now let's go back to the lens for a moment. We left it as a hollow vesicle. How does it get that perfect lifelong transparency?
This is fascinating. It starts as just epithelial cells, but the crucial change happens in the cells on the back surface. They lengthen dramatically.
Becoming primary lens fibers.
Exactly. And to achieve that transparency, these cells lose their nuclei and their mitochondria, and they just fill themselves with a very high concentration of proteins called crystallins.
And while those primary fibers form the core, secondary lens fibers are added continuously at the equator. This process actually continues throughout your entire life.
And speaking of things that must disappear, that transient vascular supply that fed the lens,
The hyaloid artery.
it has to regress through apoptosis, usually between, 29 and 32 weeks?
That's right. And that tissue remodeling is absolutely non-negotiable for clear vision. Failure of that regression causes a condition called persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous. It leads to visual impairment.
Which brings us back to that third critical player, the neural crest mesenchyme. These are the cells that migrated around the optic cup, positioning themselves between the surface and the lens.
Yes, they are the essential construction crew for the entire anterior segment.
The front of the eye.
Absolutely. They differentiate into the connective tissue structures, the stroma and endothelium of the cornea, the stroma of the iris, and the smooth muscle of the ciliary body.
And their migration actually defines the final internal spaces. So the anterior chamber appears as a cleft in this mesenchyme.
And the posterior chamber forms just behind the iris, around the lens and the ciliary processes.
This is the foundation for the whole aqueous flow system.
It is. The ciliary body epithelial components, which derive from the peripheral retina, they secrete aqueous fluid. This fluid flows through the pupil and has to drain in the iridocorneal angle through the trabecular meshwork.
And into the canal of Schlemm.
And finally into the scleral venous sinus, the canal of Schlemm.
And the immediate clinical relevance here is crucial. Mutations in the regulatory genes for those neural crest cells, FOXC1 and PITX2, can cause major anomalies in that angle.
Which leads to raised intraocular pressure.
And primary glaucoma. It's a delicate fluid mechanics problem that starts way back in development.
It really is.
Let's quickly wrap up the surrounding support structures. The choroid and the sclera differentiate from the mesenchyme surrounding the optic cup.
Right. The inner layer becomes the vascular choroid, and the outer layer becomes the tough, protective, fibrous sclera.
The extraocular muscles, which let us track movement, they derive from precortical mesenchyme, and they get their innervation from cranial nerves 3rd, 4, and 6. And the eyelids start as small skin folds that fuse for a while, around weeks 10 to 11, and then they separate later, around week 24.
Right. And shifting to postnatal life, the complexity doesn't stop. At full term, the eye is already about 65% of its adult size. The lens is more spherical to compensate for the eye's shortness.
But vision is terrible.
Vision is incredibly low, estimated around 2400. Adult vision isn't reached until about 2 or 3 years of age.
And that immaturity makes the neonatal eye really vulnerable. Preterm infants face a high risk of retinopathy of prematurity, ROP.
Which is a pathological, almost explosive proliferation of the retinal vasculature because of immaturity and, well, abnormal exposure to external stimuli before it's ready.
And even after birth, the brain is still setting up shop.
Oh, absolutely. The visual pathways, the lateral geniculate body, the visual cortex, they are all patterned postnatally by visual stimuli. The brain needs aligned, high-resolution input to wire itself correctly.
So any condition that impedes that, like strabismus misalignment, can lead to amblyopia.
Yes. This is where the brain actively suppresses or just ignores the input from the less functional eye.
And that's why treatment often involves patching the strong eye.
You have to force the brain to develop and use that deprived visual pathway, essentially repatterning the visual cortex to achieve binocular vision.
And finally, we have to mention this fascinating modern discovery: the link between lifestyle and the eyeball's growth.
The prevalence of myopia, nearsightedness, has soared. It's affecting nearly 90% of young adults in some East Asian countries.
And it's strongly correlated with less time spent outdoors in natural daylight.
It appears that the amount of time spent outdoors directly influences the signaling pathways that regulate the normal axial growth of the eyeball. Without sufficient daylight, the globe often grows too long.
Resulting in myopia.
Exactly.
It's just astonishing how precise the spatial relationships have to be. We followed the eye from a tiny molecular decision on the neural folds, watched the optic cup turn inside out, saw the lens pull itself into place, and tracked the vessels that had to recede to ensure transparency.
The precision is truly humbling, and it's all governed by these regulatory genes dictating folding, migration, and apoptosis. The connection to the bigger picture is that minor genetic failures, a flaw in PAX6 or SHH, can have these major cascading clinical effects because the timing is so rigid and interdependent.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to explore. Knowing how essential external stimulation is for the final maturation of the visual cortex and how daylight exposure relates to axial length and this dramatic rise in myopia, how might modern learning and our indoor lifestyle habits be fundamentally reshaping human visual anatomy in this generation?
That's a question that connects embryology directly to our collective public health future.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the astonishing development of vision. We hope you feel a little more well-informed.